Hello, selectors, and welcome back to the Life First Podcast, where we're talking about all the centers that you can play in the new set 8 coming up. We're going to talk about how YukaYuka control works. Now, to start this off, YukaYuka control, I actually like YukaYuka a lot. I think it's pretty good. I can't tell whether it's C-tiered or B-tiered. It's one of those. Ultimately you're going to run up against a hard thing, where and then not this set, but in set 10 you'll have Remember, which is a little bit kind of does what it does better, and then also you've got Tama right now, which runs up against it and kind of does what it does a little better, and you also have Aya, which is like sort of the premier tempo deck of the format right now, which doesn't exactly do what it does better, but it's almost like YukaYuka wants to be in a tempo deck, but being a white tempo deck is a little bit difficult. Kind of, you can do a Death and Taxes route, I suppose, but it's tough. It's a tough sell, especially because Death and Taxes, generally speaking, uses YukaYuka as an assist, which you can't do if it's the center. So YukaYuka runs into a couple hard roads here, but I think I found a little bit of a niche that it can do that Tama and all these other decks can't do. So let's get right into what YukaYuka Control does and what YukaYuka does. So you got YukaYuka Star 3, I think that's how you pronounce it, is a level 3 white Elrig with the following abilities. Auto. When the Signy on your opponent's field attacks, that Signy loses its abilities until end of turn, unless it pays colorless. That's an annoying ability. It is actually pretty good. So I wouldn't sleep on that one. It's probably its best ability. You just need to maximize it not giving your opponent a ton of enter. And once you do that, you'll get away with it. So the next one is Target Enter ability. Target Signy on your opponent's field gains the following... you just bounce it. You just bounce the target Signy on the opponent's field. Now, let me tell you, actually very good. So if you're depriving them of enter, this is the perfect ability to do. It does mean that discard's a little harder because you're bouncing it to their hand, but it kind of is white way of answering anything on the field, which is pretty nice. And you do have white, or we're going to be running blue, so you have the ability to strip this from their hand as well. And the reason why we're going to run blue is because in very much Kiru fashioned, its once per game ability says discardy stuff. So you're trying to bully yourself into a catch-22 where you get the best advantage of this, which is its once per game action ability. Do the following 3 times. Unless your opponent discards 1 card from your hand, look at the top 3 cards of your deck. Discards 1 or pays 1. Excuse me, that's a very important part. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 card from among them to your hand, and then put the rest in the bottom in any order. You do that 3 times, right? So basically, the opponent can pay 3 enter, can discard 3 cards, any mixed match of those 2 things. But what's stronger than paying an enter is making the opponent discard a card. So you're going to want to really focus, especially because it does pair well with its auto ability, you're going to try to focus on making it so your opponent doesn't have a ton of enter to work with, right? So we're going to be trying to pair that when we look at this Elrig deck. What we ended up going down, the route we ended up going with is, I'm going with the Mel Invisible route here. And there's a very specific reason why. I want green in this deck. It's for the main deck. I'm not gonna leave it as a surprise. Kome is the main reason why I want green in this deck. As soon as I read YukaYuka 3 and I saw her abilities, I knew I wanted Komai in the deck. Because Komai has the wonderful ability of basically turning your deck into Tama. And Tama's great. Tama's good. You know, that's why you run this deck, is to try to enter starve, and that's one of the things that the attacking twice as your Elrig does. So when you're going to put green into the deck, you're basically forced into 2 options. You either take Mel's line or Bang's line, right? Depending on how efficient you want to go with your enter. I decided with Mel Invisible because, again, Mel Invisible allows you to stop damage, which really helps against fellow Tama players. And it's also a 3-stop, which I really like, which means that I can play Madoka as my blue. It frees me up to play Madoka, and Madoka Dubs specifically as my blue, which I think is really, really good. There is a world where you can play something else as your green line, I suppose, and play Madoka Break, but then you gotta focus harder on the discard at that point, and at that point, I think you're just playing a bad Aya deck, so I think it's better to focus on Dub. Dub is cheap. It doesn't put any stress on your enter. You can put 3/3/1s out there very easily on turn, like defense step 2, with this Madoka dub, and discarding a card at random will be good in the long run against your opponent, plus drawing an extra card, something we like in the decks as well. So we end up with this type of L-Rig setup, right? We get the Enter here with Mel Revise, which will help us pay for Komais a bit, Madoka Floats, which will help us check our hands a little bit better. We've got Energy Door here, which is something I really wanted, again, because it can be cheap. Putting the extra cards in your hand is pretty nice. But again, I just think if I'm in green, if I'm splashing green, I probably want this. I looked at my other options with blue that are Dream Team pieces, and I looked at my other options in white that are Dream Team pieces. I didn't like any of them as much, so I put that in. My second option here was either to put GGG as this here. GGG would basically make it so that basically it would say you get 2 extra enter this game. And I didn't love that. I thought it was okay. But I ended up going Can't Stop Pretty because remarkably, you don't really even need anything. You just need to be running. I thought you needed to be running like blue. I mean, you do because it costs blue and it is a blue type. But there's really nothing. It's not a Dream Team piece. It just allows you to have more defense. And I figured as I was doing more and more of this, I really didn't have any reason to play any of the Exceed cards main deck. So it was just like, yeah, sure, I'll take stopping an extra damage. That seems fine. Why not? Again, all this stuff doesn't vanish either, which is kind of nice. It plays into this idea of like, I don't really care what the board's doing. I'm just gonna go ahead and put stuff in here. Another option I thought about when I was getting more into this is if you cut the green and you put like, I don't know how you'd cut the green. I really would want to keep Komais in the deck. But if you cut down on the green, so maybe not Energy Door, right? Maybe some other stuff. You could go more white-blue, and you could end up being in a white-blue freeze deck, which kind of works, but I don't love it because she doesn't necessarily support freeze, she just would like freeze. And when I'm in that world, I'm kind of thinking, I'd rather have things like Neon Tetra rather than be freeze deck, have freeze to support what I'm trying to do with the Enter Starving rather than be a freeze tribal. So I thought that as well, but I ended up not going down that route because I just didn't think it was good, and it put me too strongly into blue, a little less into green, etc., right? So here's the main deck, where we ended up with. The first thing I wanted to start with was Komai, right? And when you start with Komai, you need to add green, so then you start thinking, all right, what green do I add in here without really hurting myself? And the answer is Chirin, as some amount. It could be more than this, it could be less than this. I like all these other cards, though, so I really wouldn't go more into this one. And this will allow me to enter charge. Now, between Energy Door and Mel Revise, you basically only need 4 green enter, but you need 6 to be sure you're going to hit your green enters. The easiest way to do that is with just a multicolored. It's like kind of funny. I've been like, I went from loving multicoloreds to being like, I'd rather run stuff that's strong and on their own monocolored, to coming kind of back around to them being like, actually, they're not too bad as long as you use them as a 1 of or 2 of in your deck and like no more than that. So I ended up going with this route, plus I just needed more level 1s that didn't have Life Burst, especially because I put some here and I've already got the guards. So once we're done here, I've got to fill up the rest of my slot. The easiest way to do it is throw some amount of Akufuku into the deck. So I threw the Akufuku into the deck. Again, there's other options like Nettle Types Y that you can open up lanes with that Life Burst, but we're trying to avoid giving our opponent enter. So I ended up in this scenario. Okay, cool. Now I finished out my greens, right? Another option too was thinking something along the lines of, Robin Hood for a while was in the deck, but then Robin Hood's giving them enter, and that's kind of, again, what I was avoiding. But I like 1 or 2 Robin Hoods to be another answer to Komai. Another thing you could do is add 2 Demeter into the deck, because again, that's kind of enter starving, because Lancer doesn't necessarily give them enter immediately, and goes nicely with the Komais, because you can basically attack with 1 Signy and then down your other 2. You get piercing damage, which is really nice. So that is a very serious option. If I was like very seriously playtesting this deck, I may more highly consider it. That's why I'm trying to let you guys know that it exists. But since I'm in this enter starving route, all right, how else do I enter starve? Well, I need to get some discard in here, and when I get discard, another really good white card that also enter starves is Gaebog. Usually it's a 2 of, sometimes you go up to 3 of. I wouldn't go much higher than that in most decks. So I threw that in there, and then we had to talk about discard. This didn't seem like a deck that really cared about keeping its hand size high, especially because you can kind of regain your hand size a little bit later with the once per game ability. So Monoman is a really easy answer. You know, there was a while I was going again down that freeze route, and I was doing Neon Tetras and Bradamentes, but it was just too much. It was too much effort in the level 1 slot and put too much blue into the deck. So Monoman is just a more closer answer that you can put all together. Some amount of Brunos is really nice, and then random drains, right? That is enough. There's not a lot of discard in this deck, so it's not going to discard the opponent out. It is just there as support. Also as support, Neon Tetra also helps you. It's not Enter starving per se, but it stresses their Enter. It stresses their hand. It's also, really importantly, a life burst that is free. So I've come really around to life bursts that are free, because there's just a lot of high microtransactions in various decks, especially if you're playing Komai and it's your main win condition. You need to make sure that you have Enter available to do stuff with, right? And it's not an unreasonable idea to have Komai in here, and then also, look, we've got 4 Exias, because Exia pairs really well with Komai. It ups it, allows it on your opponent's turn to basically, if they vanish it, you can pay 3 and bring it back. That's actually pretty realistic with the extra enter you have in this deck. You've got the 2 here. There's a little while where I replaced Ogami with Bangs, but I wanted to discard to Monoman, not necessarily Bang. So you could do that. And there's set 9, there's another card that's coming out that, like, when you have 5 Life Cloth can enter charge you 1. I actually think it's pretty fine to swap that out if you want to. But the deck is pretty greedy when it comes to enter, so you might need these whites. Again, Yuki is just a really great card if you're playing white. Let's see what else I haven't explained here. Akafuku is just a really good defensive card. Koella is just a really good defensive card. Generally, my splits have been for Exia to Koella. Koella just gives you a lot of natural selection in the deck as well. Haniols do as well. I think you could cut them for something else later down the line if you wanted to skim down on your microtransactions, which I think is a very realistic choice for later on. So if you were to think about how to cut this out, that's something you could do. Because I do think this deck is pretty high on enter choices. So it wouldn't besmirch you if you changed Can't Stop Pretty to GGG. I actually think it might work pretty well there. But that's the backbone of the deck. I think you guys could play it, like it, enjoy it. YukaYuka actually is surprisingly good to anyone who wants to try it out. You might be scared too because Tama's just theoretically the better option, which probably is true, but this has a niche that the other decks don't, which is that Tama is not necessarily built in defensively at all. Like, it doesn't have a ton of defense built into it, and just this auto ability does give you a lot more defense against various red and black decks than you would expect. And remember, if they don't pay this 1, right, like it stops Soul's abilities too. So it is pretty decent against that type of thing. It's decent against H2Os. It's surprising how much this actually hits. So if you wanted to play a little bit more of a defensive white game, but still stay in that world of mid-range, it's a pretty good deck to try out. Let me know how you guys think, if you guys are excited to try it out, if you build this slightly different. If you can figure out a freeze build that I wasn't really able to figure out in this, let me know in the comments down below, and may you always flip a life burst.